whole idea of this is to talk about the things that you guys want to talk about, the things you want to hear the answers to. And so our first guest today is Dr. David Cavalleri, who's here to talk to us about the response to general trauma, and even addressing kind of how that applies to our current situation with the coronavirus. David Cavalleri, who is here to talk to us about the response to general trauma.
And even addressing kind of how that applies to our current situation with the coronavirus. David Cavalleri, who is here to talk to us about
I'm David Cavalleri. I've been doing training
and even addressing kind of how that applies to our current situation with the coronavirus.
In addition to that, I'm a licensed counselor. I also do HIV research for the Tampa area. But this morning, I'll just be going over some of the basics about trauma, how it affects the brain, how it can manifest, some things that you can do currently and long-term to help deal with trauma. So I'm going to do a quick, very, very, very quick lesson on biology. For those of you that have taken psychology classes, this might be a little bit of a refresher for you. It might put you to sleep, but if it does, that might actually help. To start off, there are three parts of the brain that researchers look at when it comes to trauma. So when someone experiences something traumatic, and what we're dealing with now certainly can be classified as something traumatic to the lives that we lead, because we feel threatened either by our livelihood or our own lives based on what's currently happening right now. And three parts of the brain, as I mentioned, that are affected are the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of them. Two of them are located at the base of the brain. They're considered parts of the oldest parts of the brain, the hippocampus and the amygdala, and then the prefrontal cortex is known as the most recently developed part of the brain. So when it comes to trauma, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus basically helps us when it comes to recording old memories and priming us for new memories. So if we've done something enjoyable, the brain remembers that. And then the next time you plan to participate in that activity, the brain reminds you of that good thing that happened before. And when something traumatic has happened to someone, that part of the brain also remembers that. And what it does is it tries to warn the person the next time that they may put themselves into a similar situation. So whether it is going out, whether it is going going on a date, or being in a new relationship, or maybe adopting a pet, or getting in a car again for the first time, or flying, or whatever it might be that the person perceives to have been harmful to them, the brain remembers that. The brain keeps score, and it'll remind folks. And research also shows that those three parts of the brain show a decrease after a person's been traumatized. So basically, those parts of the brain are trying to hold on as much as it can to keep you from being harmed. So the hippocampus basically works like a rewind replay system for different experiences, past and future experiences. And the second part of the brain that I'll talk about is the prefrontal cortex, which is part of the brain that's developed most recently. And that's located right here on the noggin, right here up on the forehead. And it doesn't finish developing until you get into your mid-20s. And this part of the brain is really one of the more logical parts of the brain compared to the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are not considered to be rational parts of the brain. They basically act automatically. The prefrontal cortex does try to help you organize and determine what's something that's fearful, what's something that isn't fearful. So when it comes to participating in an activity, for some people, they can logically kind of sort out that this activity is not going to do any harm to me. And I'll just throw a quick example to give it some context. So for me, I'm afraid of flying. I don't care for flying. And I can trace that back to when I was 7, when I was living in an apartment complex, and a gentleman neighbor thought it would be funny to hold me by my ankles over the second story of the complex, thinking it was a joke. So I never forgot that. It was very much an imprinting memory for me, but I still flew. And I really didn't have a whole lot of problems flying until a couple of things happened. One was 9/11, and the other was a flight from New Orleans to Chicago, where the plane dropped about 6,000 feet during flight. So for me, I logically understand that flying is safe, and the prefrontal cortex tries to tell you that. And I have two cousins who are airline pilots. I have an uncle who was an airline pilot. My father has a PhD in mechanical and aerospace engineering, so he's literally a rocket scientist. So logically, that part of the brain understands that flying is safe. And when it comes to a person who's been through something traumatic, it doesn't matter how logical a person can try to make out a situation. That part of the brain gets overwhelmed by all of the stimuli that's coming at it. So the hippocampus is rewinding and replaying something. You've got the prefrontal cortex that's trying to make sense of a situation. And then when you add the third piece, the amygdala is really helpful when it comes to understanding emotions, when it comes to sensing new stimuli or encountering new feelings or fears. And the amygdala really helps prime you for when you put yourself into a situation again. So it helps determine what's a threat, basically. And for me, flying is a threat, even though I do it. But what the amygdala does, and it's also another part of the brain that's considered one of the oldest parts of the brain. And you may have heard the term reptilian brain, which really refers to the oldest parts of the human brain, which are about survival. And these three parts of the brain in combination are about surviving. So even though it doesn't feel very good when a person is experiencing something traumatic or is reliving something that's traumatic, it is really intended to keep the person from harm's way. So the amygdala, another example to provide context, it could be hearing a song. It could be smelling something. It could be going out on a date for the first time after a while and sitting across from someone and being reminded from a previous partner when it comes to something that they've said that reminds you of them, of that previous partner. So all those three parts of the brain really kind of turn into a symphony of sorts of making life miserable for people. It doesn't mean that a person has to live like that forever, because I mentioned research a couple of minutes ago. And research does show that when people are recovering and healing from trauma, that those parts of the brain do revert back to their original size. So a person doesn't have to live the rest of their lives in pain and suffering. It doesn't mean that the person isn't going to have setbacks from time to time, that the person isn't going to be reliving some of that trauma from time to time, but a person is capable of doing it. And in order to do that, a person really has to have a good support system, has to give themselves permission to feel what they're feeling, to think what they're thinking, and doing it in a way that really helps them recover. And what I've mostly been talking about with these three parts of the brain have been personal instances of trauma. And there are two types of trauma that folks tend to experience. It's primary trauma and secondary trauma. And primary trauma is the kind of trauma that a person experiences directly. So they're the person that has felt like their life has been threatened one way or the other, whether it's been in an abusive relationship, or maybe some kind of child or sexual abuse happened to them, or maybe they were in a car accident, or they've lost a loved one, or they've lost a pet. Regardless of what it is, it's something that the person holds dear to them that they perceive to be as threatening to them. And that's primary trauma. Secondary trauma is basically being traumatized through others' lives. So for a lot of folks in the helping professions, or if you're that family member that tends to be the one that gets the text messages or the phone calls from other folks when they are going through something, that over time a person can experience trauma by just hearing stories. So they can become traumatized indirectly through other experiences, because the brain doesn't really distinguish between what happened to me and what may have happened to someone else. So that's another reason why it's important for self-care and for self-healing when it comes to experiencing trauma, whether it's directly or indirectly. And when it comes to the timing of when a person might experience a symptom or an after effect from trauma varies. For some folks, they experience some of the stuff right away. And some of the things that folks might experience right away is irritability, problems sleeping too much, engaging in risky behaviors. So that could be using substances. It could be engaging with multiple sex partners. It could be a lot of ruminating. So the person is just thinking over and over again how things could have played out. And I like American football. So one of the terms that gets used quite a bit is Monday morning quarterbacking, where basically people get together and talk about what should have happened or what could have happened in the game that happens that previous weekend. And for folks who've experienced trauma, they may spend a lot of time thinking about, well, I should have said this, I should have done that, I should have gotten out of this relationship sooner, if only I had said this, if only I had done that. And for a lot of folks, it can really stick with them for a long time. So those are a couple things that happen. Another thing that the body tries to do is it tries to warn you. So if you're getting migraines, if you're getting nasty headaches, I know right now with COVID-19, I've heard multiple stories from friends who told me about them having to use the restroom multiple times a day, and that when they're going to the restroom, it's really painful for them, or that they're not able to sleep, or that they're very anxious about what's going on, or they feel very depressed, or they feel isolated because they don't feel like they have any kind of control about what's going on. And they're very fearful, understandably. And what can happen is that maybe something like COVID-19 can re-traumatize a person, because maybe they've experienced trauma in the past and have made a lot of progress to get to a good place in their lives, and then finding themselves isolated from other folks, not being able to go to work, losing their job, losing their work identity, their vocational identity, not being able to spend time with the people that they love because of fear of maybe being an asymptomatic carrier, or of just generally being anxious and not wanting to get anyone sick or get themselves sick. So for some folks, they experience things on different levels. I've had some folks who've even had mild heart attacks just because they were so traumatized by something that they weren't able to kind of let go. And part of why they weren't able to let go, and I know that this was going to get brought up, was media consumption. So I know that one of you had a question about that, so I'm going to stop for a moment and let you ask the question so I can try to respond.
I just want to go ahead and I want to say thank you so much for sharing all of that. A lot of this goes back to one of your presentations that you've given multiple times for Mental Health Association of Central Florida. It's called Reflections of Trauma. And if anyone has found this helpful, this information, we would love to host more of these events in the future, and there's more information at those that we can learn about there. But yeah, Faith, did you have a question about the media consumption?
Yeah, so again, also thank you so far, David, for everything you're sharing with us and with everyone who's watching or will watch. But my biggest question, a lot of people are talking about kind of how they're coping right now. For some people, it seems like they go one way or another. They either completely shut out the media or they seem to gravitate towards it. I kind of want to know your opinion on if you feel like media consumption plays a role in people's anxiety right now associated with the virus. I know you mentioned that a lot of it's like a loss of control. So I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Sure. The very short answer to that is yes. I think media consumption certainly does have a role in how people are experiencing COVID-19 and their own personal reactions to it. I've heard folks who just can't stop watching day in and day out. They're watching anything and everything that comes out. They're watching presidential briefings. They're watching Governor Cuomo's briefings. They're watching the news nonstop. There are other folks who are taking breaks completely. And if I was to offer my own suggestion, I would recommend that folks limit their consumption of media regarding COVID-19. That for some folks, and I've heard this told to me, that they'll allocate or schedule a time where they'll watch it, they'll watch updates. They'll allow themselves to watch something for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, whether it's going to their local news station or their favorite news information website. My recommendation would be that if they do consume media, that they may consider wanting to adopt some self-calming or self-soothing techniques, or to have those available to them. Because for some people, they start to experience, understandably, maybe shortness of breath, they start to worry, they start to get upset. And what some folks can do to help kind of bring them back into the moment is taking deep breaths. It could be, and this might sound a little silly, going into your fridge and grabbing an ice cube and holding your ice cube for a few seconds, or maybe grabbing a cold beverage, or counting things, or if you have a pet, maybe petting them, or if you have a partner or a roommate, holding their hand, something to help ground them. So basically it brings them back into the present moment. Mm-hmm. So, or maybe an aroma, what was mentioned earlier about me doing these trainings is that oftentimes I bring essential oils. For some folks, taking a little bit of a whiff of lavender or rose or something to help calm or soothe them or bring a positive feeling back to them is really helpful for them. So there are ways that folks can consume media. I just think it's a good idea for folks to also have right next to them something that will help keep them composed while they try to sift through all the information. Another thing I would recommend is to find reputable websites if they're going to be consuming information. That way it doesn't feel like they're watching screaming matches, or they're hearing about some new study that's been conducted with 4 people that shows promise, when myself as a researcher just finds kind of problematic. But I think it's okay to watch a little bit. When it comes to media consumption and other habits to help cope, I know a lot of folks who've been catching up on TV shows. Nothing wrong with that. For some folks, lighter stuff is really what helps them throughout the day. So if folks need to watch The Office for the 50th time, then watch it. For me, it's generally Arrested Development, but for other folks, it might be watching some videos on YouTube. It could be Netflix. It could even be picking up a book. I know that's kind of an unusual thing that folks don't always do. But I've been doing a fair amount of reading recently. I think it's okay to consume some media. I just think it's important to try to regulate that as much as you can, so that you don't feel overwhelmed by it, because depending on what you read or what the source is, you could easily find yourself in the middle of a panic attack from the information that you consume. And it's important to take care of yourself as much as you can during this time. So a little bit of media consumption is okay. I just would be very cautious about spending too much time looking at your television set or your laptop screen, reading about the number of new cases or deaths or anything else that's going on, because for some people, reading this stuff can really bring back some terrible memories. And even though that's understandable, it's important to have other coping mechanisms to help them while they experience, or while we all experience this, because we're all experiencing this on some level. Even those of us that have been able to stay employed, and then for many of us who haven't been able to maintain employment. And then there's the trauma, if you live in the state of Florida, of trying to file for unemployment. That's been a huge disaster. So I think that's another thing that folks could try to manage as best as they can in this time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for responding to that. And I do have one other question for you. I know you mentioned it a little bit earlier. You talked about people with everything that's going on, kind of bringing it back to their own trauma. Does that trauma they went through, does it have to have been through something related to what's going on, or could it be completely different?
It can be completely different. It does not have to be something that's related to a pandemic. I mean, it could be a loss of control again. So for some people who've experienced sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional abuse, for example, for a lot of them, they weren't in control of their situation. So terrible things happen to them. And for some of them, they may feel that right now a terrible thing is happening to them. So it is very possible that a person who's had an extended lifetime of other terrible things happening to them may find themselves in another place again thinking, boy, here's another terrible thing happening to me. And related to that, when people start to feel that, might be feelings of wondering if life is even worth living. So suicidal ideation is something that would not surprise me. I've heard it anecdotally, but I'll be curious to see how this plays out over the long term in terms of people who've considered taking their lives because of all of the trauma that they've been through and feeling that things just are kind of hopeless. Mm-hmm. So it's not a surprise. Or to hear more cases of domestic violence, or about violence against children, or violence against pets, that because of all of the stressors and the pressure and the suffering that people are going through, that the outlet that they end up taking it out on is the person next to them or the animal next to them. So it's important to pay attention to that. And that's why it's important to really have good coping mechanisms. So like some of those grounding techniques are fantastic for the moment, but in my Reflections of Trauma workshop, I talk a lot about different ways that people can recover and heal. For some people, it could be as simple as going for a walk or exercising. For others, it can be humor. Humor is fantastic. I know it's hard to try to do things together these days, but one of the biggest things that I tell folks is that it's important to not do this alone. So it could be Zoom meetings, it could be Skype meetings, it could be FaceTiming. If you do have a loved one at home, spending time with them, or if you have a pet, taking them for a walk. I know some of the beaches have started to reopen, so if folks practice social distancing and do some of the other things that would really help flatten the curve, then maybe spending some time in nature can be very healing for them. I do a fair amount of yoga, so yoga is something that I do to help me when I'm feeling a little stressed out. For some folks, prayer is incredibly important. You cannot underestimate the power of worship. For some folks, worship is what really gives them strength, where they're able to say, all right, I'm going to give this problem to you, to the Creator, whatever you believe in or whomever you believe in, and allow that God or deity to really be the one to take those worries away, at least momentarily. Counseling is another thing, and I'm a licensed counselor, but counseling isn't for everyone. For some folks, they find help, they find recovery, they find healing in other ways. But counseling can be an option. Another is peers. Sometimes just picking up the phone and calling someone and talking to them for a little bit is incredibly powerful. Just by hearing another voice, hearing another person, and not having it be a newscaster talk at you. I know a lot of folks, and usually when I talk about this in my Reflections of Trauma workshop, I talk about having a nothing day. I think a lot of folks are having a lot more nothing days than they would prefer to have. But every once in a while, having a nothing day and not feeling guilty about it can be very powerful. It could be just vegging on the couch watching TV. I suggest you do it with someone, whether it's over the phone or computer, or if they're physically right next to you, or if it's your pet, whomever. But I think it's important to allow yourself to take time for yourself, regardless of what it is. I mean, I've heard stories of folks who just go on a bike ride for hours, or they get on the motorcycle, or they do gardening. I've been painting a fair amount too. So for some folks, another way that people heal is through the arts, whether it's writing, whether it's drawing, whether it's painting, whether it's creating. For some folks, that is a path to them. And in that regard, Freud was right. Freud had a concept called sublimation that basically was a matter of taking some not so pleasant feelings and doing something positive for society. So for a lot of artists, that, according to Freud, is a way of trying to express some of those emotions in a way that is cathartic and helpful for them. So a person isn't doomed if they've experienced trauma. It's important to have a support system, though. It's important to have a set of activities that you like to do. It could be meditation. It could be just it could really be anything, something that helps a person kind of recover. So there are lots of different ways that folks can feel better about themselves and about the world around them. And this will pass at some point. Hopefully there will be some good that comes from this about the way that we interact with our environment, but this will pass at some point. We will not be living like this forever, but there's something that we probably will all learn from this one way or the other. And for those folks who've been traumatized, I hope one of the messages that they're able to take from this is that they are damn strong, and regardless of the hell that they've been through, that they are capable, and that if they rely on each other and tap into those resources that they have available to them, because it doesn't have to be expensive. A lot of things I've mentioned don't really cost a whole lot of money. So you don't have to go bankrupt trying to find salvation or finding healing or recovery. So there are a lot of different ways that folks can get back to a place of feeling good about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for answering that as well. I wanted, this isn't quite a question, but it is a comment. I just wanted to thank you for how validating this information is. I know for a lot of people, when they experience trauma, they kind of downplay it and they minimize it. And especially what stood out to me the most, or what always stands out to me when you do this presentation, is when you talk about secondary trauma and how the brain doesn't discriminate between primary trauma and secondary trauma. People will, if they haven't experienced it themselves, then it's not valid. It's not, it's if they're experiencing these feelings after whatever they've experienced, they feel like they're not worthy of having the reaction that they do. And this information really just goes to show that it's not a character flaw that you have. It's because of your brain structure and how your brain works. It's out of you. This reaction is out of your control, essentially, because it's true that these instances they've experienced do have an effect on us.
It does. I mean, a lot of people have, I've heard that people feel invalidated because they weren't the ones in the middle of the situation, and they shouldn't bitch or moan or complain because, boy, I wasn't right there when it happened. But brain doesn't care, and those folks need to feel validated just as much as folks who have been in the middle of it. Burnout is a real thing for folks, especially in the helping professions. And part of that burnout is because people hear very hard stories day in and day out, and then maybe they go home and they're that friend or family member that also is getting the text messages or phone calls. And we really weren't designed to withstand or experience so many terrible and difficult stories or experiences. I mean, we're designed to do quite a bit. But day in and day out, whether you were there in the middle of it or not, it doesn't matter. That person's story is valid regardless of their positioning of whatever it was, whether it's a life story or their story, whomever it is.
Mm-hmm. That's so true.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And thank you again so much, David, for just talking with us. And I think that, as Mary said, it's very helpful for a lot of people to just feel validated right now, even if they're not positive for the virus, or they aren't sure if they're positive for the virus, having that general anxiety. And I think just having somebody say to you, it's okay. I think that is so reassuring right now, because a lot of people do feel like, well, I'm not positive, so it's not okay for me to feel like this, or I haven't been directly affected by it. But for those of us who maybe live with some of the essential workers, any of that, or the people who are the essential workers, I think it really goes a long way that you're saying that it's really okay for them to feel overwhelmed, and for all of us to not just completely put on a brave face all the time. Like, it's okay that we feel overwhelmed. It's okay that we feel like this, and it's just a matter of finding those positive ways of addressing them and coping with them. And I think that just really goes a long way for a lot of people, myself included, for sure. Like, I'm not immune to feeling anxious and all this stuff that happens. I've gotten really good at video games, which I never thought would happen. I don't know about you, Mary.
No, I've been doing a lot of like at home like dance like workouts and stuff. I've found it to be not only just like really entertaining and cathartic, but yeah, it's kind of this like tactile thing too that's kind of also kind of a grounding, anxiety reducing activity. Yeah.
And there was one other thing I wanted to ask. Sorry to cut you off, Mary.
No, you're good.
To ask you, David, in terms of coping positively, what is your opinion on people who, are struggling right now with this new norm, or like you said, at least for right now, it's our new norm. It's not forever. But for those people who are having trouble finding that consistency, would you recommend having at least some of the days or most of the days having kind of a daily routine, even if you're, in your sweatpants? How do you have that consistency in your day again?
Yeah, I would concur with that entirely. That I think it's important for folks to try to get into some kind of routine, some kind of normalcy. So for a lot of folks, they feel like they're out of control. And I think one way that folks have exhibited that is by buying tons and tons of toilet paper. And I saw a guy walk out of a Target about a month and a half ago with 96 rolls of toilet paper. And I thought, that's a lot of toilet paper. So I understand why a person feels like they would need to buy that much toilet paper. It's because of that lack of control. And I think one way that a person can at least feel like they have some kind of control is by telling themselves, all right, every day I'm going to at least take a shower between these hours, and I'm going to do a little bit of work between these hours. And this is time where maybe I'll take a short nap or I'll eat something. So it's really, for some people, doing just some basic things like self-care. So it could be taking a shower. It could be shaving. It could be putting on clothes. I've heard some stories of folks who have just put on some clothes, like nice clothes, just so that they feel like they're dressing up again. That way they feel like even if they're not really going anywhere, they at least feel like they've accomplished something. So I do think it's important for folks to have some kind of routine, whether it is your bedtime routine, whether it is your daytime routine, if it's work. For some of us, we're juggling work and children who are at home right now. So trying to have a schedule and keeping your wits about you can be a challenge, but it's important to have some kind of schedule. And it's okay if you have days where that doesn't happen. People are going to have setbacks. We're going to have days where we're not going to want to do anything, and that's okay. It might be 5 out of the 7 days out of the week you feel like you're really on top of things, and 2 out of those 7 days you feel like, I didn't get anything done. That is okay. Or even if it's 5 days out of the week you don't feel like you've got anything done, but 2 days you really kind of got your act together, and that's better than it was a week or two ago. That's movement. That's movement in a direction. So it doesn't matter if a person is getting all of their work done day in and day out. It's important that they try to work towards some kind of schedule. And if they have a day where they fall back or they have a setback, that's okay. That's natural. It's okay for folks to have a day or two or a week or a stretch where they are just struggling. And it's okay for folks to struggle. It's important, though, to make sure that they are not struggling alone, because I think part of the struggle for some folks is that they feel so alone that they don't feel like they have a lifeline, that they don't have a friend they can talk to or a family member. So it's important to really build up those relationships that you have, lean on those folks. So that way, if you are having a rough day where you tell them, you know what, I've been in my PJs all day, I've been eating out of the peanut butter and strawberry jars all day, and that's all I've been doing. And it's important for someone to say, hey, it's okay that you had a day like this. What are you gonna do tomorrow? Tell me about tomorrow. Tell me what's on the plate for tomorrow. And if it could be, oh, I'm not really sure, it might be a matter of saying, well, what are some things you might want to do? And this isn't counseling. This is just being a friend, just listening to someone, just being there for someone. Even if that person is telling you that they're having the worst feelings in the world, just to have someone on the other line, someone on the other end, or sitting right next to you is so critical. And I think going back to that sense of control or routine or scheduling, I think in partnership with that is having someone there to support you while you're doing it. So I really think the hardest part about what folks are experiencing right now is that sense of isolation. So it's okay to feel that, but there are resources out there, and the Mental Health Association is one of them. There's another one that I'm familiar with, peer support space, that's local to the community, that has daily check-ins. The Mental Health Association has been doing a lot of support groups. So there are opportunities for folks to connect. And if this is all that we have available to us, I really suggest folks to check out those websites, check out their meetup groups, check out and find out what's going on, see anything, find some way to connect with someone, because you're not alone. You truly are not alone in all of this, even if you feel that way, because there are other folks who are probably feeling and thinking exactly the same way as you do, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for doing that, that shout out, David.
Yeah.
We have, definitely worth noting is that we have some really good community virtual remote resources for people in the community that are just in need of a little bit more support every day. So, well, Monday through Friday, all business days, we have a virtual anxiety and depression support group for anyone experiencing that. And it's from 1 to 2 and 3 to 4. We also have not anxiety or depression specific. We have a Warmline, a mental health Warmline. So before you're kind of in that crisis stage, you can reach our Warmline, which I'll post like information down in the comments. And we also, of course, we're always taking inquiries for referrals for our connections program. And Faith, do you know the information for that? The new phone number?
Yeah. So I will, I'll also have you post the phone number, okay. Mary. That's not specifically at the top of my head right now, but if you could post that. So we are trying to, one of the things our team's really working on is reaching the community right now. And so being one of the 2 people heading the Connections program, for those of you who aren't familiar, we do have a program where people can reach out to us via text or online. They can also reach us via phone if they need to, with the number that Mary is going to post. And we will actually, if you share with us anything of, what you're feeling right now, or if you're looking for specific services or you don't know what you're looking for, we have a team that will work with you to the best of our ability to try to get you connected with some potentially good options. And to kind of build on that with what Mary and David were saying is that there are a lot of support groups right now that are virtual. There are a lot of organizations that are trying to accommodate what's going on right now. So even if you feel like maybe in the past it wasn't for you, feel free to, look into it again. See, peer support space, I know, is a really great one where people can just come together and, and same with our anxiety and depression support group every day. People just want to be able to come together and just talk about what they're going through. And I think that really resonates with what you were saying, David, about people just feeling validated right now. And for those of us maybe who don't feel like they have anybody, or they feel like the people around them don't understand that they're not going to respond well to you talking about your feelings, there are people, as we've all said, that really care and that we really want to hear what's going on with you. And we want you to know that you're not alone. And again, as David said, that there is an end to all of this. It may not be right here yet, but it is down the line and it is somewhere in sight. Mm-hmm. And David, I also want to give you a shout out because I know that you run 2 support groups with our organization as well, which make a huge difference. And so that he's like, I know.
No, sure. Whatever I can do to help.
No, absolutely. And so, David, you're an incredible help to anybody who, I know you do 2 main ones, which are our sexual trauma support group, as well as a suicide support group. So people who've struggled with suicidal thoughts or even previous attempts, those thoughts come up again, whatever that is. I know that people can reach out to you or to us if they're interested in getting involved in that. And then again, Mary's going to post all this information. And our hope is that through these videos, we are able to help you guys feel like you're a little bit more informed, like you kind of have an idea of what's going on. But also, you know, that's one of the reasons we're doing this is we want you guys to feel like we're listening to you. So we're going to be starting to show these videos, and in the days leading up to them, giving you an idea of what the topics are, who the guest speaker is, and asking you for the questions that you would like to hear the answers to. And I, for one, am just really excited about that. And I just want to thank Mary and thank David so much for being here. And thank you guys for whoever's watching or whoever will end up watching after we post this. We just really appreciate it, and we would love to hear your feedback on all of this. That being said, Mary or David, do you have anything else you want to say? Or Mary, do you have any other questions?
I think that, like, both of you covered everything so beautifully. Yeah, most of anything that I had a question on has been answered. David, do you have anything else you would like to say?
No, I hope folks listen. I hope they get something from this and they reach out if they feel like they need to. It's totally fine to reach out if they have questions. If you have questions for me in particular, you can certainly go through the Mental Health Association and they can forward them to me. I'm technically back on Facebook, so if folks want to reach me, they can find me there. But really the better way to do it is just through the Mental Health Association. If folks have questions, they are more than welcome to forward the questions to them and they'll get them to me. So otherwise, I want to thank you both for giving me an opportunity to talk today, and hopefully we get to do this again, and hopefully we won't be doing this for too much longer.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah,
hopefully.
absolutely.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, David. It was so good to talk with you.
Of course,
Yeah,
anytime.
thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Have a good one.
yes, you
Thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
No, you're good. Bye.